Hailing from one of Medarot's most controversial titles in the series' existence and history, it is the final boss of Shingata Medarot. It is WEA00E Duo Kaiser. With a kit of Break, Hyper Missile, Laser, Multi-Legs, and the leg ability of Auto Charge, which passively fills the Metaforce gauge each turn for every action completed. Now, as far as Shingata Medarot representation is concerned, we have of course had Beat and Servo, the Beetle representations and starters of Shingata Medarot in Medarot S for a pretty hot minute now, if not nearly from like day one launch. So its very unique art style is something we've already had a little bit of a teaser and a taste of to kind of get used to. But with the introduction of Duo Kaiser, the final boss and one of the only female official weapon types in the franchise, it's a rather mixed reception, if I'm being completely honest. But as far as kit is concerned, it's more or less identical to another very iconic weapon type that we've seen, and that is the legendary and iconic God Emperor. Break on the head part is a gravity attribute skill that is known for mostly one of two things. The first of which is, as a gravity attribute skill, it does have a CG reliance based on its success rate, so the higher your charge above a threshold, the more of a success bonus you're going to get, which means higher likelihood of landing hits and landing critical hits on top of that furthermore. But gravity attribute skills are also known for something even more than that, and that is their ability to heavy punish. That means if using Break on an enemy that has at least 2 or more heavy parts, they are going to be absolutely feeling the pain for packing all the extra weight. Where if they're only packing, say, 1 or even no heavy parts at all, really the only thing you'd be using Break for is a success bonus and just hoping that you could score a pretty solid crit on top of that. Hyper Missile on the right arm is a gunpowder skill that gets a piercing bonus instead of a regular AoE damage condition, much like regular missile does. So it's a lot easier for Hyper Missile to break a lot of things instead of mostly spreading the damage and peppering the foe to make it easy for something else to break it later. But the really nice thing about Hyper Missile, though, is the fact that because it is a gravity skill, or a gunpowder skill, it does mean that it also has sure hits when fully capped up to rank 5 or higher, so you don't have to worry about things dodging or grazing you too heavily. And with a base power of almost 2100, you're going to be pretty hard-pressed on the inability to break things pretty consistently, and you're going to have a pretty solid performance from that part overall. Laser on the left arm is an optic attribute skill that gets a times 1.5 damage bonus at a 30% charge and a times 2 bonus at 100% charge. And it's also a very solid and very well-rounded and consistently performing shooting skill that is charge reliant. Unlike, say, Ghost Shot or Hyper Beam, which leave the user at a no dodge and a no defend penalty, Laser doesn't necessarily leave you as wide open and make it a whole lot more consistent and user-friendly to use. And with the damage bonuses also reliant on Metaforce charge, it means you don't have to use the charge immediately, especially with a base power of over 2000, but if you have it, it does make it a lot easier to do so and a lot more potent when you get to that point. Multi-legs means that Duo Kaiser will have relatively solid coverage across most terrains, and unlike biped legs, which tend to put an emphasis on overall speed over terrain compatibility, multi-legs tend to kind of do the opposite, where they tend to trade just a little bit of overall speed, typically, for better overall terrain coverage across the board. But of course, with leg stats like what Duo Kaiser has, which I will get to in just a minute, she does kind of break that rule a little bit as a boss-type model. And the ability of Auto Charge does synergize incredibly well with all 3 of her parts, much like it does with God Emperor. So it's going to be a very user-friendly model that, if you already have the iconic weapon Mantis Shrimp type, you can pretty much use Duo Kaiser right out of the box and know exactly how she behaves. As far as leg stats are concerned, she is actually pretty solid off to a good start as well when it comes to all of her numbers. With a base mobility of 916, she's already off to a very impressive start in the speed department, but an evade of 722 is not terrible, but also not great either, as it does mean she's not going to be dodging or grazing a lot of stuff really consistently. But for a model that is basically designed as an all-around DPS type with charge reliance, dodging really isn't necessarily in her repertoire anyway. A melee resist of 959 isn't terrible. It means she can take a hit up close and personal if required to, but a shoot resist of 2144 is really nice though. as this does mean she can most certainly exchange pot shots with the enemy sniper from afar and not go down too terribly while still taking 1 or 2 hits. When it comes to armor, she's packing some pretty solid numbers there as well, with almost 4,500 for the head, just shy of 3,400 per arm, and over 5,200 for the legs. Very healthy and rather strangely designed model here that Duo Kaiser is. But also packing some very impressive damage as far as that is concerned. With a base power on break at 1353, hyper missile at almost 2100, and laser at base 2035, she is most certainly packing some very solid numbers. Success is also a very impressive number too as I go into. With break at 1353 means she's almost never going to be missed or grazed. Hyper missile don't necessarily need it because it's a gunpowder skill, but higher success means higher crit. And the lowest success here is actually just barely over 1,000, which is still where you want to be with that ideal sweet spot. And auto charge, like I said, synergizes with all 3 of those remarkably well. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Duo Kaiser, as strange looking as she is and as controversial as the game she comes from is, I still have to rate her non-biased at a very solid 8 out of 10. Much like the traditional God Emperor model is, which also got the tune-up treatment later, Duo Kaiser is kind of basically where a fully tuned-up God Emperor really wants to sit. Not quite there with a number of stats, but also soaring over him in other aspects. And with a very synergetic kit between break, hyper missile, and laser, and auto charge synergizing with 2 of those 3 skills very, very easily, she's basically a one-person weapon of mass destruction and one-person army. So you can use her almost immediately out of the box and really not have any trouble using her or not really need any setup doing so. As mixed parts, I do have to rate her equally at an 8 out of 10 for these same reasons. Despite the very unique kit, I do have to mention as well that she is the first female weapon type of the series officially, so this does open a lot of options and possibilities for a lot of female-only teams. And given the fact that it is also one of the only female auto charge legs that is not biped or wheeled legged, such as with Shushu Pop 2, that does also add another element to the mix for a lot of your charge reliancy on female teams. And again, very synergetic kit means you can use her by herself with no real setup, or as mixed parts and mix it up very easily. One thing to mention though on Duo Kaiser is, much like it is with nearly any other member of the weapon type series, she is triple heavy. So while she most certainly can punish for it with break, she also can eat it just as easily. And a word of caution is advised if you are planning to use Duo Kaiser, and a word of recommendation if you're planning to fight her.